The heat of the Arizona sun pressed hard on the canyon floor as the rancher, Cole Maddox, stood facing the Apache woman who spoke with the calm certainty of someone born from warriors. Her voice carried no hesitation. Her eyes did not blink. She had chosen her words like a blade. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across his boots. The air between them felt carved from stone. "A man may speak of strength," she said softly, "but only the earth can judge him." Cole felt her gaze searching him, not for muscle or bravado, but for truth. A truth he wasn't sure he owned. She lifted a carved spear and placed it in his hands, not as a weapon, but as a measure. "You say you honor me," she murmured, "yet honor is not proven with a kiss or a promise. It is proven in the places where fear waits." Her fingers brushed the wood, smooth, worn, sacred. Cole swallowed hard. He had worked cattle, broken wild horses, survived winter storms that killed stronger men. But none of that felt as heavy as the weight of her test. She pointed toward the jagged wall of red mountains stretching across the horizon. "You will climb there," she said quietly. The canyon wind swirled dust beneath their feet, carrying the raw scent of sagebrush and baked stone. "You will cross the ridge before the sun returns," she continued. "No gun, no horse, no food, but what nature offers." Cole nodded slowly, understanding that this was not a challenge of skill, but of spirit. She watched him, with an expression both fierce and unreadable. Her dark hair moved like long shadows in the wind. "If you fear pain, go back," she warned. "If you fear truth, go back. But if you mean the words you spoke last night, then climb." Cole felt his chest tighten. He thought of the night before, how she had stood by the fire, her face lit by amber flames, speaking of legacy, of bloodlines, of carrying forward the strength of her ancestors. He remembered feeling humbled, honored, and terrified all at once. Now, the time for words had ended. Only actions counted. Cole stepped toward the base of the cliffs. The rocks were blistering hot under his palms. The ground shifted beneath his boots. Behind him, she stood still, watching not with hope, but with expectation. If he succeeded, he proved his worth. If he failed, he simply disappeared from her path. The climb began brutally. The first ledge crumbled under his grip, ripping the skin from his fingers. Sweat dripped into his eyes, turning the world into a blur of red stone and burning light. The vast sky above him felt endless, mocking his smallness. But he kept moving, one hold at a time. Midway up, a rattlesnake coiled in the shade of an outcrop, its tail whispering warnings. Cole froze, breath tight. A fall from this height meant death. But the test was clear. Fear would not excuse him. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his weight and climbed around the creature, heart pounding like drums. The higher he climbed, the colder the air grew. Wind whipped against him, threatening to tear him loose from the stone. But each time he faltered, he remembered her voice. "Only then will I know your spirit matches your words." That line struck deeper than any wound he had ever taken. At last, Cole reached the ridge. His hands shook violently, blood streaked his knuckles, his breath came in ragged bursts. But the view stole everything away, miles of untouched wilderness, red cliffs glowing in sunlight, and the whisper of ancient spirits carried by the wind. He felt small but alive. He walked along the ridge as the sun began sinking behind distant mesas. The ground cut into his boots, leaving blisters with every step. He found a cactus and carefully sliced it open, drinking the cool, bitter water inside. It wasn't much, but it kept him standing. The journey demanded endurance. Night crept across the sky like a slow-moving blanket. Coyotes howled far below, their cries echoing up the canyon walls. Cole gathered dead brush and sparked a small fire using stones. The flames were thin, shaky, much like his strength, but they were enough to keep the darkness from swallowing him. He sat there quietly, thinking of her, Not her beauty, but her discipline, her unshakable spirit, her fierce expectation. She wasn't testing his body. She was testing whether he could carry responsibility without being crushed, whether he could face fear without looking for excuses, whether he could be trusted. Before dawn, Cole rose again. His legs were stiff, every muscle aching. He continued along the ridge until he reached the final descent, steep, sharp, and unforgiving. The path down was worse than the climb up. Loose stones slid under his feet. Thorns tore at his clothes. Gravity pulled at his balance. He slipped once, tumbling onto his side, pain exploding across his ribs. Dust filled his lungs. He coughed until his vision darkened, but when he pressed his hand into the dirt, he felt something. Warmth. Sunlight. The first light of morning, and he knew he was almost home. Almost worthy. At the canyon floor, he staggered forward, sweat dripping from his jaw. The Apache woman stood exactly where he had left her, as still as a carved statue. She looked at him without moving, without speaking. The silence stretched long enough to feel like a judgment passed by the earth itself. Cole dropped the spear at her feet, not in surrender but in completion. His arms trembled, his throat burned. He waited, not expecting praise, only truth. She stepped toward him, eyes searching every cut, every bruise, every line of fatigue. For the first time, there was softness in her gaze. She touched his shoulder gently, the strength in her fingers surprising him. Her voice carried a new tone, one of respect. "You faced the mountain," she said quietly. "You faced yourself." Cole felt the weight lift from his chest. She had not demanded perfection. Only honesty, only courage. She stepped back, the morning sun painting her silhouette in gold. "Now," she whispered, "I know your spirit." Cole exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body like smoke rising into the sky. He had walked the path alone, but his steps had led him back to her, and he had earned his place. The rancher stood at the canyon's edge, breathing hard, dust clinging to every inch of his torn shirt. The descent had nearly broken him, but he refused to falter. When he saw the Apache woman waiting in silence, her expression unreadable, he felt every bruise sharpen with meaning. She watched him without speaking at first. The wind brushed between them, carrying the scent of cedar and stone. He stood steady, despite the ache deep in his muscles. She noted his posture, the way he didn't boast or collapse. Quiet endurance meant more than any heroic speech ever could. As she stepped closer, her eyes softened, though her face stayed disciplined. She studied his injuries, the scraped knuckles, the bleeding shoulder, the swollen ankle. He had faced the canyon alone, exactly as she demanded. But more important to her was the calm in his eyes. No pride, no desperation. Her hand lifted slowly, brushing dust from his chest. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. "You faced fear without running," she said quietly. Her voice carried the tone of someone acknowledging a truth they had hoped to see. Strength without humility destroys nations. Humility without strength cannot protect a child. He listened without interrupting. Something about her words felt like a judgment older than both of them. In her tribe, worthiness wasn't about muscle or violence. It was about spirit, consistency, steadiness, a kind of courage that did not need witnesses. He realized the test was more spiritual than physical. She circled him once, her steps soundless against the red sand. The sun dipped lower, brushing gold across the canyon walls. She placed her fingers along his ribcage, where a bruise was forming. "This wound," she said, "would make many men complain. You did not." Her gaze met his. "Why?" He inhaled slowly before answering. "Because the test mattered," he said. "Because you mattered." His tone wasn't dramatic or pleading. It was simply honest. She felt the truth in it, steady, grounded, unforced. A warrior's truth, a father's truth, a partner's truth, the kind her people valued. Her expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to reveal recognition. "Words are cheap," she said, "but sacrifice—" She touched the torn skin on his arm, still warm from exertion. "Sacrifice is not." The air thickened between them, not with tension, but with understanding. He had earned the right to stand before her. For a long moment neither spoke. The canyon around them hummed with evening insects, the world narrowing to the space they shared. She studied his face carefully, searching for something she hadn't yet named. What she saw made her shoulders finally relax. He hadn't conquered the canyon, he'd respected it. She gestured toward a flat stone nearby. "Sit," she said softly. He obeyed without question, lowering himself with a wince. She knelt beside him and unwrapped a small bundle of herbs, crushed roots and cloth strips dyed with plant pigments. Her hands moved with practiced skill, steady and confident. She cleaned his wounds with water from a clay flask. The coolness stung, but he didn't flinch. Her fingers pressed lightly against his skin, examining the damage with the trained eye of someone who had tended warriors her entire life. "You heal well," she murmured. "A man who heals well survives well." Her words carried weight. To her people, survival wasn't just physical. It meant emotional resilience, the ability to endure loneliness, hardship, and responsibility. She glanced at him again, catching the calm, patient way he watched her work. No fear, no complaint, no ego. She found that more persuasive than any triumph. She wrapped his shoulder with cloth strips, then sat back on her heels, studying him anew. "You crossed the canyon without weapon," she said. "You climbed the cliff without rope. You walked through the dust storm without covering your face." She tilted her head softly. "Were you afraid?" He nodded once. Yes. She appreciated that honesty. Most men she'd known lied about fear. Only the wise admitted its presence. "But I didn't stop," he added. "I couldn't." She exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but meaningful. She'd been waiting for a man who understood that courage and fear often walk together. She reached for his hand, turning it palm up. His skin was rough, streaked with dirt and dried blood. She traced the lines there, feeling the life etched into them. "Our children," she said softly, "must be born of strength, but also of truth." She looked up. "You have both." He swallowed, unsure how to respond to the depth of her words. She rarely spoke sentiment aloud. Her people taught emotion through action, not declarations. The fact she offered these thoughts openly meant something had shifted, something sacred, intimate. He treated the moment with the reverence it deserved. She stood and offered him her hand to rise. He took it, letting her pull him up gently. The grip lingered longer than necessary. She didn't release him. Instead, she stepped closer, so close he felt her breath warm against his collarbone. The air between them seemed to hold its own heartbeat. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. A child deserves a father who returns when he is called, who endures when the world turns harsh, who does not pretend to be more than he is, yet becomes what he must. Her thumb brushed the back of his hand. "You returned." He felt the meaning behind the words settle deep in his chest. This was more than a declaration. It was acceptance. Acknowledgement from a woman whose standards were shaped by warriors, traditions, and generations of storm-tested lineage. Her approval wasn't given lightly. It was earned through sweat, grit, and spirit. She stepped back only enough to see his face fully. For the first time since their meeting, she allowed a small, unguarded smile to appear. It wasn't a smile of triumph or reward. It was something gentler. Trust, perhaps. Or hope. Maybe even the beginning of something resembling love. He felt warmth rise through him, not from pride, but from connection. Her smile carried more weight than any trophy or oath. In that simple gesture, she acknowledged him as equal, not outsider, not suitor, but partner. Someone she could entrust with future generations, her legacy, and perhaps her heart. The wind shifted again, cool and soft, brushing through her hair. She lifted his hand and pressed it gently against her chest, just over her heartbeat. "This," she whispered, "is where a child begins, not in strength alone, but in the place where courage meets tenderness." Her pulse throbbed steady under his fingertips. He closed his hand slightly, not gripping but holding. She didn't pull away. The acceptance was unmistakable. The canyon, once a barrier, had become witness to something deeper. The test was over. The answer had been earned. And the bond forming between them felt as ancient as the desert itself. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. She leaned her forehead against his briefly, in a gesture reserved for those chosen, trusted, and meant to walk forward together. "You are worthy," she said quietly. "Not because you conquered anything, but because you honored everything." He exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. The canyon behind him no longer felt like a trial. It felt like a threshold he had crossed into a new life, one built not on conquest, but mutual respect, one grounded in earned trust and the promise of something enduring. They stood together in the fading light, neither speaking, both understanding the silent vow forming between them. Their connection didn't need ceremony or witnesses. It lived in the quiet, in the breath they shared, in the steadiness of their bodies leaning toward each other, a promise written not in words, but in spirit. When the stars emerged, she stepped beside him and nodded toward the path leading back to her people. "Come," she said, "your place is no longer out there." Without hesitation, he followed. Their silhouettes moved side by side across the desert, toward a future shaped by courage, worthiness, and the beginnings of love.